Hello, welcome to Matters of DeCorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. Role-playing games have a history of taking elements of mythology and literature and bringing them to life in a group setting so that someone can describe one of these mythological elements or even partially historical elements, and a group can experience it for themselves, interact with it in ways that perhaps it hasn't been interacted with before. Dungeons and Dragons brings elements of Tolkien and other fantasy, classical monsters of myth and castles and historical elements together in ways that the original creators or the people who invented these items never intended or hadn't considered. I am sure there are things I have done with dwarves in Tolkien's Middle-earth that Tolkien probably wouldn't have approved of. That was Belly Firebeard, so named for his tendency to light himself on fire. It always seemed like a good idea at the time. As we evolve and find more literature and examine more mythologies, all of these things can fit into our role-playing games. Minoan Crete mythology and the Minotaur, or Kenku and other creatures from Japanese mythology. All of this stuff can form into this amazing mix of things that we deal with. And as the hobby evolves, new monsters just show up. Things that were created in the head of Gary Gygax or Dave Arneson or any of the people who have come past them. The creatures of H.P. Lovecraft. All of that forms into this astonishing matrix of history and literature and creativity and mythology that we can walk through, interact with, fight, befriend, seduce, perhaps all three of these things. And having this broad background in mythology involves a bit of education. I have a classical education for the most part, and I've studied a lot of literature and old mythologies and new mythologies. That helps these things. We have the monster movies of the 1950s forms a part of our current literature, and the culture around them forms sort of a mythology itself. Godzilla and King Kong and other kaiju, or giant insects, Night of the Lepus, giant rabbits rampaging across the land. The threatening monoliths is rocks who grow up to huge tall and fall over, and the individual pieces growing up in this reverse domino effect. The brain from Planet Axis. If you look at what we grew up with and what we have in our current lexicon of terrible things to have to deal with, all of this fits on that table between the game master and the players. There is a certain amount of cultural literacy that I consider requisite for the game master needs to have this. The players can catch up. You can introduce these concepts to players who have not had time with the movies or the television shows or the old mythologies, people who haven't done the studying. Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games are tremendous gateways to learning this information. I read more when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I was a good reader before, but I studied some of these things. Centaurs means that comes from someplace. Where can I read more about elves? Magic swords. One of the game masters I had in St. Louis, Rob, thank you, Rob, was really well read on some of the Thieves' World novels, the Belgariad. He's the reason I read the Belgariad. And because these elements would get introduced into our role-playing game and in kind of a mishmash, things that were combined that were never really meant to be combined and yet got combined. And it worked. And but you go to the source material and I had this tremendous advantage reading the Belgariad because I'd seen these things in a role-playing game. I had some experience with them. That was my gateway into that particular branch of learning. Role-playing games are an intensely powerful educational tool for any number of reasons. Most of them involve a decent amount of math, and math you have to repeatedly do. Even if it is a little bit, add this to this, compare this number to this number. Is this number greater than that number? That is elementary practice. A teacher will give a student in the second or third grade 50 of those problems to do in a night so they get the rote information in their head. In a role-playing game, you will do that calculation 50 times in a night. So, I'll do it 4 times before I have to make the roll to make sure I know what I got to roll in that D20. And I don't think of that as homework. It's the same math. You could theoretically carry that on and make the mechanics in a game reflect higher orders of math, but that would get really boring because you don't want to do math in the middle of your fight scene. Referencing charts and reading and understanding the rules, translating those rules into action on the table. Writing your own material from time to time. Creative writing and English and language and communications. Role-playing games involve a lot of these skills that you don't think of as an educational experience until you look back on it years later and wonder why your test scores improved after you had a bunch of guys over in your basement for a weekend or every weekend for a couple of years and realized you were studying statistics and probability and basic mathematics. We played GURPS a lot in the basement of St. Louis, and Dave and Mike, God bless you, Dave, would sit down with the GURPS space rules for building spaceships, which were not easy. I couldn't follow them. I really couldn't. But they'd take those rules and set themselves budgets, and each of them would build a spaceship, and then they'd sit down and have fights. And I learned from watching them do that, listening to the exercise. And because there's a lot of math involved and a lot of recursive math, I had to build spreadsheets in Excel. I learned Excel so I could work with the GURPS vehicle rules. There is a surge of interest in role-playing games and culture now, which is amazing. And some of it is a recognition of the fact that these activities can be educational. And that's where it gets really fun, because you can find someone's area of interest and you can let them walk around in it. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars, Star Trek, the Avengers, Marvel Cinematic Universe, all of these things. All of these things can be reflected in dice and paper on a tabletop. And once you've got someone by their interest the rest of the experience becomes transcendent in a way. The experience of taking someone out of their day-to-day life, sitting down at that table in that room with that soda and chips, rolling dice, looking down at your writing on a filled out form that describes a character you are using to experience a world that you want to walk around in. Takes every educational aspect of that event and turns it into recreation. Let me say that again, because that is super important. It takes every educational aspect of the activity and turns it into a recreational activity. If you make a student do homework for 2 hours a night, you are giving them an unpleasant experience. They are going to have some resistance to it. Some kids will not resist homework like that. Most of them, oh my gosh. The mental gymnastics and arguments I had to get into with the teenager across the hall to get some of that homework done. Until he learned more efficient ways to get it taken care of, so I didn't have to worry about that anymore. Homework is work. It's a job. It's something that you have to do. It's a duty. You are judged by it. At that role-playing table, if you don't know how these two things add together to make this, the guy next to you will probably tell you. If not, the game master will hold up things for a second and make sure you've got that. And why don't you make a note there just to make sure? And now you're taking notes on the math on your form. And you are applying it. And you're trying to work out how good of a chance you have to do something. I'm going to roll this. Well, how good am I at this? If I roll this, how often is that going to result in a success? And now you're doing statistics and probability. I want to know a little bit more about this. Well, this is in this book, and now you're reading, and you're studying, and you're applying information that you're getting from reading to a test of that knowledge. You are voicing your knowledge of that subject in an interactive form. You're doing homework, but it ain't work. That's play. It is important to get outside and run around to get some sunlight, play on the playground, throw a ball around, get active. You need to sweat and move and run and jump. Play is the work of children, and that is excellent for physical health, for muscular development, for growing up strong and having endurance, being able to expend more energy, feel less fatigue. I wish I had done a bit more of it when I was young. I wish Andrew had done a bit more of it, but I was a fairly active child, and we managed to get Andrew active from, well, as much as we could. But every bit as important as getting out and running around and getting the sunlight and the fresh air and working your muscles, there is the play of working the mind. I don't know anything more effective than role-playing games. Computer games are getting good about this. Decision making and manual dexterity and games with a good puzzle aspect, or working with accuracy, learning storylines as you go along, absorbing a narrative through events. That's good, but nothing is going to beat sitting down with that paper and working out your own math over and over and over again because you want to. That there's a hard copy over here. I've got a PDF that I can loan you, and read up on this and see if that's what you want to do. Well, I'm a wizard. What do I get at my next level? Well, look it up in the book. Do some reference work. I've had kids at my table. I mentored a group of really, really smart individuals at a game store in Burbank for years. most of whom are still gamers in one way, shape, or form, and have grown into thinking adults. And I really enjoy the experience of running a game for people who haven't played it before, whether they're first-time role players or the first time with that game, because I get to watch a learning process and facilitate a learning process. I get to be a game master and a teacher at the same time, which is doubly rewarding. The joy of I have some training in teaching. There's a joy to teaching. There's a joy to the profession in that you have knowledge and there are people there who don't. And you get to share what is in your head. There are many different methods of doing this. There are many different styles of teaching, and you can pick and choose the one that works best for you to get that knowledge here and there and confirm that it has landed where you have sent it and that it's going to take and hold. No, or not, students all being different people. As a game master, I get to do that too. There are things, I see people light up when they learn a new fact, because I'll throw a lot of real world information into stuff because that gives the world that I'm running a feel of verisimilitude. It feels real, and the more real it feels, the more involved people can get. And so I'll have people, is that a thing? And yeah, that's a thing, look it up. And the light, the inspiration that they grab this thing I threw out, maybe even as a throwaway, and suddenly they have a new thing. They have a new tool in their arsenal. They have a new weapon in their golf bag, so to speak. My metaphors are tinged by years of role-playing, you may notice. It behooves the game master to have culture, see Star Wars, watch Lord of the Rings, go see the Marvel movies for a start, get a feeling of story and plot and action and what these characters are, so that when you refer to one of these characters, when someone says, I want my character to be like X, you know X. You can fill in that value and carry it along. There are reasons that this hobby is, in my head, one of the greatest things in the world. There are plenty of hobbies out there, and many of them are the greatest thing in the world. And for everyone, they have their appeal. Role-playing games were one of my favorite things in the world because it picked me up and carried me forward from not being that great of a student to being pretty good at what I do. And I've seen that work with other people as well. Well, thank you for following me along on this particular journey through the educational nature of role-playing games. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy the video, give me a thumbs down. Feedback is feedback. If you have your own experience with learning or teaching something through a role-playing game, something else you'd like to hear me talk about, another subject you'd like to hear me cover, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. I will love getting a comment. You will love leaving me a comment. If you have not subscribed to my channel yet, why not? My channel's awesome. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you do, hit the little notification bell next to it so that you're alerted as soon as my videos become available. If you would like to support the channel in a substantial manner, I invite you to hit me up my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/ScottCorum, and consider donating. Absolutely anything helps and allows me to make better videos more often. In the meantime, thank you very much for viewing. I'm Scott Corum. This is what has mattered to me, and I will see you next time on the next Matters of Decorum.